Not the zap. So, staying in the land of Coptic, another participant in the Galaxy project is Julien Delhez, and it's very good to welcome you to talk about an individual Coptic manuscript this morning.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Houghton. It's an honor to present here for the very first time at the Birmingham Colloquium on the textual criticism of the New Testament. My name is Julien Delhez. Some of you may know that from 2022 to 2024, I was a member of the Galaxy project, and that in 2025, I joined the bilingual project, which is focused on bilingual manuscripts of the New Testament. If you want to learn more about these research projects, you can check the two following websites. For my presentation of today, I chose a topic that fits with the scope of both projects. That is, a Greek-Coptic bilingual manuscript of the Pauline Epistles. Within the frame of the Galaxy project, I had to transcribe this manuscript. On the screen, you see a screenshot of the interface in which I worked. For me, at that time, this manuscript was a textual witness among others. I wasn't conducting an in-depth study of it. Since then, many things have changed. Within the BioCross project, my colleagues and I are closely studying manuscripts of the bilingual manuscripts of the New Testament as artifacts and as textual witnesses. We want to understand their codicological features. We distinguish between various types of bilinguals. Hence, my main research question of today: what type of multilingual manuscript is SA 542 or SA 35? SA 542 is the Biblia Coptica number, whereas SA 35 is the SMR number. This research question may seem simple, but the answer isn't. The preservation status isn't too bad for a Coptic codex. 39 folios out of at least 120 are still preserved. I say at least because we don't have the end of the codex. We know that at least 15 quires existed. The languages of this manuscript are Greek and Coptic, more precisely the Sahidic dialect, but there is much more Coptic than Greek. The Trismegistos number is 108002. I already gave the Biblia Coptica and SMR numbers, and there are many different inventory numbers because the folios of SA35 have been dispersed around the globe. They are now kept, or they were kept, at 10 different institutions in Europe and in the United States. That's a great example of how grateful we can all be for the existence of digital editions. Here you see an overview of the inventory numbers. When page numbers are between brackets, like here, it means that these numbers aren't visible on the page. In some cases, the numbers are in fact uncertain. When it comes to the contents, more than 200 pages included passages of the Pauline Epistles. The codex also contains parts of Acts and 1 Peter in Coptic. I'll talk about that. So here's an overview of the contents. Passages in Greek are in bold characters and in dark red. Passages in Coptic are in normal characters. Seeing this, one can already make a few observations. First, all 14 Pauline epistles must have been present in Coptic, partially or entirely. Since we know more or less how much text was present on each page, and since the 7th page starts with Romans 3:13, one can assume that the codex started with Romans 1:1. And Although nothing of 1 Timothy remains, that is probably because it was in the 18-page gap between page 176 and page 195. Second, after the 14 Pauline Epistles in Coptic, one finds passages of Acts and 1 Peter in Greek and Coptic, not the whole text. There's not enough space for the whole text of Acts in the gaps here and here. And at the end of the codex, there is a direct transition between 1 Peter 3:4 in Coptic and 1 Peter 5:1 in Greek. Admittedly, it isn't surprising to see a Coptic manuscript containing the complete Pauline Epistles plus something else. SA4 in the SMR, which Frank mentioned a few minutes ago, includes the complete Pauline Epistles plus the Gospel of John. But here it's different, which brings me to my third observation, and that is what puzzles me most. The bilingualism isn't uniform across the codex. In the Pauline Epistles, you have only 2 Greek passages on page 39, 1 Corinthians 1:22 to 29, and on page 199, Titus 2:15 to 3:7. But in Acts and 1 Peter, there are many more such passages, even if, as I said, there is still more Coptic than Greek. Perhaps this manuscript had 2 different parts, having each its function. Well, there's one thing, one thing which really puzzles me, the question that I cannot answer yet is how to make sense of the 2 passages in Greek, the 2 Greek passages of 1 Corinthians and Titus. If you have any idea, please let me know. Perhaps things will become clearer for me in the coming months. As I said, it is only after joining the Bicros project that I started to study this bilingual manuscript as a bilingual manuscript. I expect to learn much more thanks to my work in the Bicros project in the coming months. One scholar, J.K. Elliott, suggested that it could be an accidental bilingual, which would have been copied by a scribe who couldn't properly distinguish Greek from Coptic. Well, this idea is interesting, but I would still try to see whether there could be a logic behind this uneven distribution of Greek passages. One more question. Can we be sure that there were only 2 Greek passages of the Pauline Epistles? Maybe there were others in the lost parts. To explore this hypothesis, I've used a tool created at the Göttingen Academy, the manuscript speculation tool, which exists thanks to Troy Griffiths, Liliana Atanasova, and Ulrich Schmid, to whom we are very grateful. With this tool, when you have a codex which is partially preserved, say you have 20 pages, but there were at least 20 more, the manuscript speculation tool allows you to reconstruct the content of the missing pages. You have to give a few parameters, say the number of columns per page, the number of lines per column, and the number of letters per line. There's always a margin of error, obviously. This is how the interface looks like. These are the parameters we have to control. If you want to learn more about this tool, you can check the blog of the Coptic Old Testament project. It's quite easy to find on the Coptic website. Since, as I said, we know more or less the amount of text per page, I used the manuscript speculation tool to see whether there's a conflict between the size of gaps and the amount of Coptic text which is missing and was probably in the gaps. Because if the gaps are much bigger than expected, given the number of missing verses, it could mean that some verses were present first in Greek and then again in Coptic. I've used the tool only on the gaps whose extent is certain. I didn't try with, say, gaps between two unplaced fragments. The result of the analysis is that there seems to be no such conflict. In other words, the tool didn't show that due to an insufficient amount of Coptic text, some gaps must have included Greek passages. But this finding can be interpreted in various ways. And the easiest would be to say that there were indeed no Greek passages in the missing parts. Another would be to say that there could have been short Greek passages, but too small to be detected with the manuscript speculation tool. A third way would be to say that we don't know for sure whether the entire Coptic text was included in all gaps. Perhaps in some parts there was a selection of Coptic and Greek passages, like at the end of the codex. I wouldn't expect this, but we cannot exclude it. Let me now talk about other aspects, including palaeography. As Christian Askeland wrote in 2013, developing a science of Coptic manuscript dating is a daunting task. There have been many attempts to date these manuscripts. I will refer to only two of them. In 2008, Pasquale Orsini stated, on the sole basis of palaeography, that SA35 was from the first half of the 6th century. He had a 50-year confidence interval, which I find quite optimistic. In 1969, Karl-Heinz Schüssler dated the manuscript from to the 10th century on the basis of various criteria, including Greek accents and paragraphos. Being unaware that SA35 was from the White Monastery, he was unable to compare it to codices from the same place. Personally, I would try to use as many criteria as possible. The writing material parchment isn't very useful in that case. We only know that it isn't an extremely early bilingual codex of the New Testament. Palaeography is indispensable, but the margin of error is substantial. Greek-Coptic bilingualism is a criterion too. Such codices weren't produced in all centuries, or at least they weren't likely to be produced in all centuries. The layout, including column number, also matters. Lastly, textual features, such as the type of grammatical mistakes, may tell us to which extent the scribes still understood the Coptic text that they wrote. This may be a criterion too. I won't talk about it today because, to my knowledge, the usage of such features as a dating venue hasn't been studied in a systematic way. There are other criteria like dots and supralinear strokes, but we still don't fully understand their usage in Coptic manuscripts. So this is how the palaeography, this is how the codex page looks like. The codex is written in a unimodular script. To me, the hand of SA35 reminds of the thick and thin style of White Monastery codices from the late 7th and early 8th centuries, but it's a bit different. It could be a manuscript, well, with this criteria, it might be a manuscript from the 7th century. In any case, I would clearly reject Schüssler's view about SA35 being from the 10th century. When you compare the writing of SA35 on the left and the writing of a manuscript from the 9th or 10th century on the right, the differences are enormous. Schüssler's assessment is all the more surprising given what he wrote in his own article about bilingual codices being likely to be produced, Greek-Coptic bilingual codices being mostly produced when Greek was the language of the high culture. This was no longer the case in 10th century Egypt. So for me, this manuscript could date to an era where Greek and Coptic were still widely used as literary languages. So it could date to either before the Arabic conquest or shortly after, but not many centuries after. Lastly, the layout is also a criterion, as I said. Some manuscripts are in one column or others in two columns. SA35 is in two columns, and the format is in one column is more archaic for Coptic biblical manuscripts. The 6th and 7th centuries seem to be a time of transition in this regard. On the screen, I give a few examples of codices in one or two columns. With palaeography alone, I could have dated this manuscript to the 6th or 7th centuries. With palaeography plus bilingualism plus the layout, I'm inclined to date it to the 7th century. Let me say a few words about the origin or provenience and the provenance, which is the chain of ownership. The folios of SA35 entered European and American collections through various chains, beginning in the 18th century. Only later did scholars realize that they came from the White Monastery in Upper Egypt. It's a well-known story among specialists of Coptic manuscripts. If you want to learn more about that, you can ask me during the coffee break. Regarding textual variation, one of my main questions about SA35 was how the two versions, Greek and Coptic, relate to each other. Were they taken from two unilingual manuscripts without any major adaptation? Or was one version adapted to be more similar to the other? To solve this issue, I've compared the Coptic text of SA35 to Horner's edition of the Sahidic New Testament. I've also compared the Greek passages of SA35 to the Nestle Aland. And finally, within SA35, I've compared the verses that are attested in both languages, Greek and Coptic. So the results show a few things. First, there are small differences between the Coptic text of SA35 and Horner's edition, and also between the Greek passages of SA35 and the Nestle Aland. You have tiny differences like kappa instead of gamma. In Coptic, anta being written with epsilon, nu instead of nu with a supralinear stroke. You have some meaningful differences. For instance, there's a verse of SA35 that includes the Greek particle gar, where most other witnesses don't have it. However, it seems to me that the overall number of variants is rather modest. And when it comes to the comparison within SA35 between the Greek and the Coptic, I've selected passages that are attested in both languages. They are listed on the screen. One passage, 1 Peter 2:7-15, had to be excluded due to the poor preservation state of the manuscript page, which you see on the screen. Having checked the 3 other passages, I didn't have the impression that one version was systematically adapted to fit the other. Indeed, there are several inconsistencies between the Greek and the Coptic. The example that struck me most is a passage of 1 Peter 2:23. In the Greek, one reads, to krinonti dikaios, to the one who judges righteously. But in the Coptic, one reads, empet na krine dikaios, to the one who will judge righteously. That's a future one in Coptic, not exactly an equivalence of the Greek present participle. So then, the difference is all the more striking to me, given that the two versions appear on the exact same page. The Greek is here in the left column, and the Coptic is here in the right column. So for me, with what is known until now, I am tempted to believe that SA35 was made of the basis of two unilingual manuscripts. Before concluding, let me show you an overview of the folio's publication status. Many of them are still unpublished, and among those that are published, some are available in very old editions only. Some editions are more than 200 years old. And to conclude, well, there are many more things to say about this codex, but I think it's better to stop here. To conclude, I believe that understanding SA35 is likely to be a major challenge. One should study it as a bilingual manuscript, comparing it in all respects to other Greek-Coptic bilinguals. And I also believe that the difficulties detailed in this presentation, intimidating as they may be, only show the critical importance and even the absolute necessity of the Bicrus project. Thank you very much.
Thank you for introducing many of us to this manuscript and your description of it. Any questions or observations, requests for further information, Emanuela?
So, first of all, I think the paper was really and my question is how the palaeography use later manuscript. Are you looking at the Greek text and the Coptic text that are just either?
I looked at the Coptic text for dating it.
And what about the Greek text? Do you know which writing the one of the Greek text?
Well, it seems to be very similar to the Coptic text, also an angel. So it could have been copied really by the same scribe.
That is in the scribe. Okay. Now that's interesting because if the Coptic would point to the 6th century, right?
Seven, I would say 7th with a certain margin of error.
Okay. So my question is whether you have seen if the Greek text as accent as well. Because this would be like first like an important argument to show that accents might have been present in the first layer of production in manuscripts of the 6th, 7th century, because usually the price would be like later. And this is because in the Coptic stage we have a similar situation where there is a problem with the date. Present of accents, we want to go on the later date, but then arriving there, that's a bit of a manuscript. So I will just do this, so you can see what evidence you have found about the
Right, I would also check the accents. My concern was that depending on which area of the Byzantine Empire you're talking about, the practices may be different. And in his article, Schüssler also talked about accents, but he was making the comparison with Greek manuscripts that are not from Egypt. And it seems to me that this may be a bit unsafe. But it's true, it's also a criterion that has to be taken into account.
Andy, you were next. Oh, so you want to answer the matter?
No, I wanted to comment on this. So the typical bilingual manuscripts are Southern. And we have to start from the idea that the structure costs, not Greek. And I haven't seen any indication for accent. And one true manuscript for dating, this is an early white manuscript. So there's still a mystery if some of the early papyrus manuscripts where the first part of the white monarchy this is completely unknown where they came from. The story goes that they are from a cemetery in Athene. There's a Turin, no, it's in Naples. So the collection of Stefano Borgia, who had the first parchment manuscript, the 18th century was divided in the times of Napoleon. Rome, and they are known the Vatican and Naples. They are now Victoria Library. And there's a page at the end of the book of Job. And there's a depiction of Job and his daughters or wife and so on. And an art historian, Alain Sucha, our colleague, found this article, I think from 1976. He tries to date the manuscript according to the figures. So it's obviously a royal figure with a crown, and the ladies have also these veils and everything. And he compared it to points and other depictions of her attires. And so we can compare exactly this palaeographic style of writing, different style. And with this criteria, we can say we can even date this manuscript to the first two decades of the 7th century, because according to the article, the coins match the depiction of her life. To someone depicting Job and his daughters, actually draw a picture of the emperor. So that was a real breakthrough for us to have anything, an anchor for dating the right monarchy of this time. The 2000, the wonderful, very developed style.
Well, thank you. Was this a comment on the same topic or the different? So Andy first and then.
I think it's interesting how in the context you have the intricately Greek sections come before the Coptic, even though the Coptic is the priority, and they're always shorter range than the corresponding Coptic sections. Can you make a comment about why that happened?
Well, that is precisely the mystery. One thing which I would exclude, I mean, at first I was tempted to believe that these were two different manuscripts that had been mixed together. It would have been much easier, but it isn't the case because one choir starts, because the end of the Pauline Epistles part is within the choir, and within the same choir, you have the beginning of the second part. So these were indeed folios of the same manuscript. What was the function? That's the mystery that I hope to solve in the coming months.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very well done. I enjoyed it. My question, the one page you showed us, can you show us from the one time, the Greek and the Coptic? Yes.
This one?
Yeah, and it looks as if there are several paratextual features. And are they regular throughout the codex? I can find them quite often, even when it's only Coptic.
It depends. On some passage, it depends. In general, yes, you have a transition. You have such signs at the end of sections, the end of the section in Coptic and the beginning of the section in Greek, which in my view is an argument against the view that it was an accidental bilingual. Yeah. So there was a sign to indicate a change of language or a change of section.
But these changes of sections also occur in really Coptic stretches, or is this a feature of the bilingual parts only?
There's also such a sign in the on page 39, where you have 1 Corinthians in Greek and then 1 Corinthians in Coptic. So you have also the same sign at the when it changes.
A very good comment on the translation technique, because I've worked on this and also anyway, it's quite typical to translate. I wouldn't regard this as a variant that the Copts translate the present tense with future one, because the Coptic present tense is timeless. It's a verbal sentence. So to give read this righteously, we judge it righteously from now. to one point in the future, like I found many examples where the present tense is completely different.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for your wonderfully subtle advert for Bicross. But on bilingualism, where you had that table of where the bilingual passages were, is there?
I'm just taking.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering.
Yes, this one.
That
No.
table. Yeah,
This one, yes.
Is there any sense that different exemplars are being used? So I was wondering if for the Pauline Epistles, if there's some slight defects or gaps in the main manuscript, and it's then being filled in by reference to a second manuscript, which is a bilingual. And I think that might explain perhaps the little portion of Acts that you've just got, maybe the fragments of an Apostolos manuscript where most of Acts is lost, but you've got most of First Peter, which is more thoroughly bilingual. So can you tell any change in the Coptic text that might show either there's a different type of Coptic being used, or are there any things that the archetypes or the exemplars are different?
Well, when it comes to the language, seems to be very similar, but it's true that I didn't think about this hypothesis of unilingual being manuscript being used as a source, and then perhaps a bilingual. So that would work actually. So
Very quick, yes.
That also occurred to me, dealing with Forlaga, one point, this is one of the Apostolos or something. But the Forlaga or one of the predecessors, Pauline Epistles, that someone had simply typed excise the Greek, they didn't read it, they didn't understand it, they didn't use it, and just missed a couple of passages. I don't know how one would do this, right? But maybe there's remnants that should have been excised that someone missed. And
right.
But only for the Pauline, that's why after the Pauline book, it to be more properly. Again.
Yes, it's different. Yes.
But well, thank you that we've had so much to discuss as well as your paper, but we should stop at this point.